Mr. Venkot, you have the reins.
Hi everybody, what up?
Hi guys.
Welcome to our crossover episode of our two YouTube channels.
Yes, hello and welcome everybody. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Mac Hines. I am from the brand new, exclusively new YouTube channel known as the McCracken. The goal of my channel, in brief summation, is to both inspire and innovate everyone as creative individuals as we observe, report, and take in all the visual techniques done by the filmmakers in of their own right, as it helps you in your own creative endeavors as well on your own journeys.
I couldn't have said it better. I'm Greg Venkot of the channel FlikerTheatre, and we are celebrating our friendversary according to Facebook. 8 freaking years, if I can count with my fingers, 8 freaking years of us being buddies. And what better way to commemorate it by doing a crossover episode of our two channels, the McCracken and FlikerTheatre. And in this case, in this exclusive video, we will be talking about how the James Bond golden era connects or relates to the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yes, and as he has said, through phases 1 through 3, we're going to be drawing upon parallels between both the Marvel Cinematic Universe as well as what is known as the golden era of James Bond as well.
Which is from Dr. No, 1962, starring with Sean Connery as Bond, relating to the original Casino Royale of 72, and how this is similar to Kevin Feige's treatment of the entire 23?
The time span of the Marvel Cinematic Universe has ranged from the original Iron Man to Endgame, which spanned 11 years. 11 years. Especially since both sagas were spanned across roughly, on an estimate, on a 10-year basis.
So if you look up on Google, you will find that producer Kevin Feige, who is essentially the main creative head of how the Marvel Cinematic Universe films play out, is very similar to the same producing creative head for the James Bond movies, which became Albert R. Cubby Broccoli. He is kind of the go-to guy for a lot of producers in terms of how to make a film franchise work, with every film being of high quality, and how they can connect to each other in one giant meta plot, which is something you see more or less in TV. We've only started seeing this in movies fairly recently, because Star Wars in the 70s had to kind of kickstart this with what George Lucas as a producer was doing with his own films. And then Gene Roddenberry did it when Paramount allowed Star Trek to come back from TV and transition to films. Now it's commonplace, because you can say the X-Men universe for 20th Century Fox is its own thing, with X-Men and standalone Wolverine movies and Deadpool movies, and Trek is still its own thing, Star Wars is its own thing, Harry Potter is its own thing, the Middle-earth Lord of the Rings is its own thing, Doctor Who is its own thing. This is the way movies are now. They are usually about world building, and even if it's something as simple and still in its early stages as Avatar, we're talking about James Cameron's Avatar and any future Avatar The Last Airbender things, that's completely unrelated and another universe all to itself. But as you see my point, those are the things that we do owe to Bond, because there was no such thing as a film franchise that had multiple sequels and kept going in terms of high quality films with the same producer ever like that before. It started with Bond.
Yes, and the other key element here that did indeed start with Bond was not just the matter of an interconnected universe, but the fact that they were connected by a single central main antagonist.
So one of the things that's also interesting about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the MCU, is the fact that they built up things over time, just like we talked about in TV. So if you watched like an episode of Star Trek Season 1, you would probably not think much of Khan back when he showed up in 1967, but clearly he was a villain that later producer Harvey Bennett thought was really interesting to bring back for what ended up becoming his own film, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. So one of the things that was really interesting that Bond started, and it was also present in comics, of course, comics is where it kind of all got laid out in print form, but the popularity of building up a villain, a guy in the background who is going to show up later, and you realize that not only did he have the resources to put the hero in all these difficult places, whether it's you know, in this case, Bond having a mission where he fights this one guy, and then he fights this other guy, and it turns out they're just minions. They're minions working for a guy who's the head honcho, the real smart guy of the group. And in this case, it was Ernst Stavro Blofeld.
And if we're going to draw a main parallel to how this connects to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the clear-cut example that I can personally think of, just off the top of my head, is the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie, where we see Ronan as the main antagonist of that single film. But, of course, we find out that he's actually technically working for someone else, or at least until he turns against him. And that someone else, of course, turning out to be Thanos.
Right. And you see Thanos in a chair, a floating chair, in the Avengers. And who was really famous for being the villain sitting in a chair but Blofeld in the Bond films. So
I just now realized this would work a lot better if I actually had a cat in my hands.
Well, this guy is the dog lover, so unfortunately we don't have a cat. We could use a pillow, but that might be a little weird. So we'll put the weirdest in a later video. So,
I don't even have a small pillow.
No. They have things called cat pillows. Maybe Blofeld should use a cat pillow at some point.
Oh, a cat pillow. I didn't even think about that off the top of my head.
Yeah, that is a thing. Anyways, Blofeld's first appearance in the films is actually the second Bond movie, From Russia with Love, and he's never mentioned by name. You only know that there's a guy named Ernst Blofeld in the end credits, and the actor who played him, Anthony Dawson, wasn't even credited. It's just a question mark. So clearly Broccoli and Saltzman, the producers, thought that was actually pretty funny at the time. But it was kind of the seeds to build up a villain.
We need to draw upon how Blofeld's appearance came off in From Russia with Love.
Right. You don't actually see Blofeld's face in From Russia with Love. Neither do you see it in Thunderball. And for the most part, in You Only Live Twice, when you finally do get to see his face, it's mostly hidden until Bond finally meets him. Then Blofeld is revealed in his full-blown glory. So in many ways, the little seeds to fighting somebody like Thanos, whether it's Tony saying that's the end game, or his vision he has in
Avengers Age of Ultron.
Avengers Age of Ultron, that's another lead up to Thanos, or even something as simple as the fact that, and a third example where they mention him by name, in terms of Gamora and Nebula being the daughters of Thanos. Those are all things that are sewing into the needle point, if you will, about what Thanos is going to represent to everybody, because he is the big boss that you're going to confront. So if we're talking about something like what Kevin Feige was thinking about in terms of making the Marvel Universe like Bond, not only did it involve different actors playing the same character, which you could say that's essentially the same thing going on for Blofeld, or you could say just from a technical standpoint, we're using that word a lot, technical.
Well, by technical standpoint, it's actually a good thing that you're bringing that up, because the first visual appearance that we see of Thanos himself, an actor wasn't even cast for him. That was just pure digital animation right there.
Right, it was just a CG face based on the comics. So yeah, like Blofeld, basically this is the image of Blofeld at this point in his life. For those who are not familiar with it, Blofeld surgically changes his face. It's in Fleming's books. So every time he shows up in a Bond film, it's a new actor playing him. Not too different than, you know, Bond actors being changed over the years, just simply because the Bond actor wanted to move on, or the Bond actor unfortunately didn't get fully accepted by audiences at the time. But that's neither here nor there. For fairness, we're talking about Blofeld's face changing surgically. So when Josh Brolin was cast as Thanos finally, it was kind of just a matter of tweaking him facially for Josh Brolin to play him. But he was still Thanos. We had introduced what Thanos looked like. Here comes the fully realized Thanos showing up basically at the end of Age of Ultron with Josh Brolin's voice grabbing the Infinity Gauntlet for the first time.
And it stays true, at least just at that time, of just teasing Thanos, and similar to how Blofeld was teased in the early Bond films. But something else that I felt needed to be added to this was the turning point in which the main villain decided to take action into their own hands. And if we're going to draw inspiration from the MCU, from, as we know, in the end credits of Avengers Age of Ultron, we see Thanos grabbing the gauntlet, and his words are, "Fine, I'll do it myself." And I personally feel that was the same turning point for Blofeld after the events of Thunderball, because in You Only Live Twice, that's the point where we see him truly as the main antagonist and him truly taking action into the point of that world.
I would say yes, because You Only Live Twice is the first scheme that is directly created by Blofeld. Because in You Only Live Twice, that is his baby. He wants to disrupt the space race. That's his idea. Everything before that was somebody who worked for him in Dr. No, or From Russia with Love, or Thunderball. Whether it was Dr. No himself, Kronstein, or Largo, it's Blofeld's baby now, as far as You Only Live Twice is concerned. Because Thanos is a man with a plan, and he don't give a damn. You get in his way, he is going to show you, make my day. So anyway, what we're talking about here is Avengers Infinity War is now very obviously the On Her Majesty's Secret Service of that universe, because the sixth Bond film, George Lazenby's On Her Majesty's Secret Service from 1969, is a huge turning point not only for the character Blofeld, now taking it upon himself to further his operations, surgical operations on himself, but also a different angle of attacking the planet. In this case, Blofeld is now using germ warfare to extort the planet, and you realize he needs money by blackmailing the United Nations. And in the case of Thanos, now using the Infinity Gauntlet, this is a point where he can say, fine, I'll do it myself, I will change everything how I see fit. It's a big moment where you realize not only is Blofeld and Thanos slightly vulnerable, where there's something going on in their minds. In Thanos' mind, it's, I'm doing this for the greater good. In Blofeld's mind, it's, I need this to keep my operations going. That's interesting, because it does humanize them a tad. It doesn't give you sympathy for the characters, but it does give you a little bit of relatability. You go, oh, this guy actually thinks about things in a way where he's not just a, mustache trolling moo-ha-ha-ha villain. He's actually got something in his head saying, this is the way it should be.
And what also contributes to their actions is just how passionate they are about their own ability to do said actions. You see it through the eyes of Thanos as he is driven by essentially, in similarity to Tony, it's a sense of survivor's guilt, at least in the sense of the world of the MCU. But in Blofeld's case, I would say it personally draws a bit of a parallel to, of all villains, Apocalypse in the world of X-Men, because he's a villain that's just completely and utterly obsessed by his own power, because he believes that he can do this, and he will not let anything stop him.
I would say that there is a little bit of a similarity in that they are very narcissistically in love with their own abilities intellectually and their resources. They're very, very difficult people to reach and find some humanity in them. It's hidden within this gigantic wall of ego.
And also coming back to the matter of their vulnerability. It's both in Avengers Infinity War as well as on Her Majesty's Secret Service that the Avengers realize they cannot defeat this main villain in a head-on fight. They have to find some way around them. And in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, as we saw in the movie itself, it was a matter of Bond essentially having to go after his legal history. And you see that in the movie as Bond sneaks around the activities of Blofeld's lawyer, of all things.
Yeah, it's a great little suspense sequence with Gumbald in Bern, Switzerland. But it is something that shows the inner workings of SPECTRE. It's not that different from when the Guardians of the Galaxy go to nowhere and are trying to catch Thanos off guard by getting the which stone is it again?
Oh, in Guardians of the Galaxy, it was the Power Stone.
The Power Stone.
Yeah.
He had to get the Power Stone, but it turned out he also had the Reality Stone at the same time.
Well, the Reality Stone, as we saw in Thor: The Dark World, that was the Reality Stone, and that is the stone that is actually liquid-based. And the Reality Stone later ends up with the Collector, which also appeared in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, and then, of course, comes back briefly for Avengers Infinity War.
So, the thing is, if you're trying to catch Blofeld off guard, there's a good chance, like Thanos, he's got it covered already.
Alright. in contribution to what you have just said, it was, again, it's a matter of finding a way around the main villain in order to defeat them. And for the Avengers case, it is a matter of essentially cutting off Thanos' resources. And what are Thanos' resources? The Infinity Stones, which, of course, when all collected together, and as confirmed by the lore itself, has essentially made Thanos a god.
I would say that one of the things that's really important that happens in On Her Majesty's Secret Service in terms of fighting Blofeld is that Bond can't fight Blofeld by himself. He needs the resources of his fellow agents. In On Her Majesty's, he gets an unlikely help from Draco, the crime lord, who happens to be the father of his bride-to-be, Tracy DiVincenzo. So what Blofeld doesn't realize is that his vulnerability, where he likes to essentially mac on Bond's girls, and he's done this in a couple of his films. He kind of grabs them and kind of takes them for his keeping. Basically, they're the distraction until Bond can find some way to either overwhelm Blofeld with his forces, whether it's You Only Live Twice as Ninjas, or it's On Her Majesty's Draco's, or in On Her Majesty's, it's Draco's crime syndicate men, or in Diamonds Are Forever, it's Felix's Marines. In Never Say Never Again, it's once again Felix's Navy intelligence, and in the original Casino Royale, it's to create utter chaos between all the criminals. The way to fight Blofeld is to overwhelm him with either an equal amount of resources or to create a situation where you possibly are insulting Blofeld's intelligence. And we'll get to that later. In the case of Thanos, all of the people need to come together to fight Thanos. This is the only way you can fight all his forces. Thanos is so strong, you have to fight him at all fronts.
Yes, and we see that in Avengers Infinity War, but what the filmmakers of Infinity War did so well was that they did not tease at all just how tragic of an ending this was going to be. And arguably speaking, producer Cubby R. Broccoli did the exact same thing during the production of On Her Majesty's Secret Service back in 1969 as well.
They wanted to adapt Fleming's novel pretty loyally, so they wanted to get Tracy's death, spoiler alert, Tracy's death into the film, and it worked really well, I think, for the movie. It's why it's one of the greatest films of all time, because it was brave enough to have a tragic ending. Most action films, adventure films, the hero always wins. That was one of the very first films ever in which the hero didn't win. And it takes a lot of courage for a producer to say, I want our heroes to lose in this movie. And it's very hard to think of other movies in which they are courageous enough for the hero not to win. Whether it's Planet of the Apes, or it's Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. You had some movies that were courageous enough for the hero to either be stuck in a stalemate or to completely fail. So when Avengers Infinity War does come out, it blows away the audiences going, oh my god, everybody lost. Thanos is sitting there smiling. No different than Blofeld has a slight smile on his face when he tries to get the upper hand and shoots at Bond, and the collateral damage is Tracy, his wife, only minutes after their wedding, dies in his car in his arms.
Which is also exactly from the book as well. Arguably speaking, even in the book, it's actually a little bit more of a brutal death as well.
Yeah, it's really sad. It's basically, she falls over bleeding and Bond's comforting her. She might be still alive and slowly slipping away. That's only something that you could kind of get away with a little bit in a PG film, but that's neither here nor there once again. So one of the things that's interesting, and people could, you know, if they really wanted to make a connection, say that Gamora's death is rather similar to a Tracy death, but more, I think, along the lines of everybody fading into dust, out of existence. That's the great tragedy of Infinity War, that they lost, and everybody that they cared about, certain people that Thanos randomly picked with his snap, have faded away out of existence. So that's the tragedy. That's the ultimate lesson that the hero has to learn. They are humbled by it, and they have to kind of refortify their positions in order to figure out what to do for the next chapter. Tony starts at the very beginning of the original Iron Man. The first time you actually seen him in a full-blown scene is at a casino. Man in a casino. No different than how you first meet Bond in Dr. No. is at a casino, meets a beautiful woman, makes love to her, then we get to the rest of the adventure. And the story of James Bond goes from there. By the time you get to the end of the Golden Era, which we're basically saying Diamonds Are Forever, Never Say Never Again, the original Casino Royale, Bond has changed a lot. He's now a wounded figure.
Yeah, we were talking just the other night about how he has gone from both the books and the movies from his beginning to a man who's really just essentially proud of his ability to kill people. He just figures he sees himself as a man who has a talent, and he may as well just put it to good use, especially since the government has essentially kept an eye on him for a good number of time now. But by the time he reaches his later books and movies, especially in the golden era of the Bond movies as well, is that he's considerably more driven by his duty.
And that's also true even if you're just paying attention to the Daniel Craig Bond films. He's similar in that when he's a veteran of his field, he wants to focus on duty, and he's doing it for England. This leads us to Endgame, something that's referenced a lot in the series, whether it's Avengers Age of Ultron, or basically at the point of Doctor Strange saying we are in the Endgame now. Endgame functions a lot like Diamonds Are Forever, Never Say Never Again in the original Casino Royale put together. At the beginning of Diamonds Are Forever, Bond is going on a vendetta. He wants to avenge the death of Tracy. So it is not much different than Thor wanting to avenge the universe, essentially, for what he considers his failure. And then, rather interestingly enough, and this is where it's very hard to deny the similarities, Thor kills Thanos. Spoiler alert. Thor kills Thanos in the same way Bond kills Blofeld. At least it appears he kills Blofeld.
Something else I just noticed, both Thor and Bond, they went for the head.
Oh, that's a good point. I didn't think about that. Yeah. That's awesome. So, in this case, after that happens, it appears that the world is going to have to just move on. In the case of Bond, he's just kind of working his way to Tiffany Case, and you kind of get the feeling that Tiffany Case and him are just kind of these reluctant buddies at this point. And it's no different than how Tony is not really that interested in wanting to help the Avengers. So this leads us to the Never Say Never Again part of the story, where in that story, Bond has an injury, and he has to kind of work his way back to being in physical condition, to the point where now he's fighting a new SPECTRE agent that's working for Blofeld, who may be taking over SPECTRE from Blofeld. That's also something that happens in the books, whether you're looking at Thunderball or whether you're looking at You Only Live Twice in book form. So
it could also be a possible concept that it might explore again with bringing Rami Malek into the scene as well, but that's just based off of pure speculation, especially with how it'll play a key pivotal part in the genetics part of Blofeld's background as well, and how he keeps manipulating himself and turning himself surgically essentially into another being.
He's playing a different role. You see that in Diamonds Are Forever, you see that in SPECTRE. He's always playing a different role. We first see that actually in On Her Majesty's when he's playing Balthazar de Beauchamp. He's playing different people, and he becomes these other identities, essentially to protect himself. You only know it's Blofeld when he's petting that cat and when he's talking to Bond as if he is like the smartest guy in the room. That's when you know that that's Blofeld. So at the beginning of Diamonds Are Forever, it turns out he killed a double, a surgically made double. And this leads us to the third act of Endgame, which is going back in time and then trying to steal the Infinity Stones so that Thanos doesn't get them in time. But it doesn't quite work out. In terms of the original Casino Royale, going back in time is no different than looking at Bond's past, seeing the flashbacks, noticing that you did meet Blofeld with a certain phone call before all these events took place in the rest of the movie series, which is brilliant.
Especially since both films, from a certain point of view, when looking at the broad spectrums of the stories that they tell, essentially they're telling the same story of moving on. And in order to move on, the truth is it's not enough to just say, we have to move on, we have to let it go. The truth is we have to dig deep into the past and look at it from a different perspective in order to win.
And this is where it's interesting when you do talk about what will Phase 4 be for the MCU, because they didn't quite solve that with the Bond Golden Era. Blofeld was not deliberately killed. because Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman knew, as well as producer Charles K. Feldman and producer Kevin McClory, who helped create Blofeld with Ian Fleming, that Blofeld is too valuable of a character to just kill off. Of course, he got lost in lawsuits, and then they couldn't use him for a good 30 years. But when he does show up again in SPECTRE, it kind of answers part of the Golden Era's questions, which is what happened to this guy and where did he go? And it turned out he just disappeared for a while, and it took a long time for Bond to catch up to him, which is a brilliant way to reintroduce him. It maintains the mystery around him, and it maintains the ghost-like metaphors with Blofeld, that he shows up when he wants to show up, and he's there to be Bond's author of all his pain. So when we lead to the next Bond film, that Daniel Craig will be his 5th film, presumably his final.
Especially since Blofeld himself has, and this is the scary part too, especially considering the age that we live in now, Blofeld has adapted to the digital age as well, which makes it all the more scary for how he was able to survive and hide for so long as well.
Ergo, the surgical manipulations. So, this leading us to how the MCU could be like the Silver Age of Bond for Phase 4 and 5 and 6. Which is the General Gogol era.
And the Silver Age, of course, beginning with Live and Let Die, which introduced Roger Moore.
Yes, Roger Moore, through the Timothy Dalton's last 2, and only 2, The Living Daylights and License to Kill, essentially General Gogol shows up in 6 of those movies in the middle. He's not really a villain, he's just somebody with an ambiguous moral compass. He works for the KGB for Mother Soviet Russia, and he's there to get his missions done and do whatever it takes. Now, if the rumors are true, and Kang the Conqueror turns out to be the villain of the next 3 phases of Kevin Feige's MCU, he could be a good man, as issued in the comics. Just reminding you, everything we're saying was already presented in comics in some form. It's just that structurally, it seems rather similar to Bond, when you point out the similarities and really nitpick it, but not to the point where it just looks like you're reaching. We're talking about nitpicking in ways where it looks very obvious that there are similarities, as we pointed out. But if Kang the Conqueror is the villain, he was pretty much a fairly good character who slowly turned bad. Whether you want to see him as kind of like DC's Lex Luthor, or you want to see him as like Harvey Dent, or you want to see in George Lucas's universe an Anakin who slowly becomes a Darth Vader. He's somebody that could be affected by the time travel stories
for this new Silver Age, I guess, as we're going to call it for lack of a better term, for the MCU now, and how it could tie into Kang's role in the future as well.
Right, assuming that it is Kang. But again, like Gogol, he is somebody that could be an ambiguous moral compass in terms of a person who, in this case, still is in the background and then will be built up again through maybe a next 22 films produced by Kevin Feige. But also, I would say that one of the other things that's really important to take into consideration is that this is a post-Tony Stark, post-Thanos timeline, which is no different than Bond trying to understand his feelings for the love of his life being killed off. So there are many references to Tracy being dead, and there's also the elements of what is it like when there is no Blofeld. If you don't have somebody like a Blofeld, there is a vacuum. There's no common enemy that everybody's going to be scared that they have to face. So because a world without Thanos means somebody else will try to take up the mantle. Now that Blofeld's back in the Daniel Craig era, it's either a matter of, is Blofeld going to be replaced because he's in prison, or is this just another trick up Blofeld's sleeve? It's a really fun thing to think about because the writer's got a lot of things that they could work with that. Wrapping things up, I think we've made some very clear points, and if somebody out there, a fan, wants to make a giant diagram of what we said, I would love it. Make it a meme. I want to see this all planned out because, you know, when you're making YouTube videos and you got also normal jobs, you just have to kind of, you know, work your way through the best topics, and then he'll make his videos and I'll make my videos, and until then we'll do another crossover episode when we catch up again. This is Mac Hines, I'm Greg Van Cott. Please subscribe to his channel, The McCracken, and subscribe to mine, Flicker You'll find the info below. You can also find the red button. It's over here, past his face. You know, just click that red button, the number will go up, and I will love you forever, and you will get a free cookie sometime when I meet you at VidCon. That being said, adios everyone.